Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association's webinar, The Power of Place, Giving Voice to the Region and Its People. My name is Sherry Rupert, and I'm the AIANTA's Chief Executive Officer, and will be serving as today's webinar moderator. For those of you who aren't familiar with AIANTA, for nearly 2 decades, AIANTA has served as the national voice for American Indian nations engaged in cultural tourism. In addition to serving as the voice for Indian country tourism, AIANTA provides technical assistance and training to tribal nations and Native-owned enterprises engaged in tourism, hospitality, and recreation. In addition to webinars like this, every fall, in partnership with the George Washington University, AIANTA presents an online cultural heritage certificate program designed to help tourism professionals and tribal planners hone their cultural tourism skills. This year's program runs from October 5th through November 22nd. AIANTA also provides educational opportunities for tribes through our annual American Indian Tourism Conference, or AITC. We have a great lineup of speakers this year for our 22nd annual conference. This year's event will be virtually on September 14th through the 18th. And registration is now open. So please visit our website at aianta.org to learn more about our education program offerings, and at aianta.org/AITC for additional information and registration for AITC. Now, today's webinar will explore how tribes can benefit from AIANTA's unique partnership with the National Park Service, and also features insights from celebrated visionary Johnpaul Jones, who will share his experience in incorporating Native values in modern architectural design. This webinar is presented as part of a partnership-based project between the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail and AIANTA, to tell the stories and to develop a tribal place name map of the Southern Arizona, Southern California, Central California, and Northern California tribes associated with the trail. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question and answer box in your control panel. I will facilitate the questions and answer session at the end of the presentation. So today we have with us Naomi Torres. She is the superintendent of the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail. She is a conservation professional with more than 25 years of experience working to help communities form deep personal connections with their environment and heritage. Prior to becoming the superintendent of the Anza Trail, she was the chief of interpretation at 4 national parks in the San Francisco East Bay and was the community outreach specialist at Golden Gate National Recreation Area and the National Park Service partner in the development of the Crissy Field Center. A native of El Paso, Texas, she holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Rice University. Welcome, Naomi.
Thank you, Sherry, for the great introduction. I'm happy to be here to share with you a little bit about this project. We're so pleased to be working with AIANTA to share the stories of the tribes along the Anza Trail. In fact, over a year ago, the Anza Trail and AIANTA embarked on this project to develop a tribal travel guide along the Anza Trail. And we were inspired by previous projects that AIANTA had developed, in particular the guidebook and the website American Indians and Route 66. So with knowledge gained from that and other projects, we embarked on this project about a year ago. And this presentation is to share with you a little bit about the Anza Trail, our collaboration, and as well as an invitation to you to share the stories of the Southern Arizona, Southern California, Central California, and the Northern California tribes associated with the trail. Next slide. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. The Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail is one of 30 national scenic and historic trails in the United States. And the Anza Trail commemorates the journey in 1775, 1776 of 240 men, women, and children led by Juan Bautista de Anza who migrated from what is now the states of Sinaloa and Sonora, Mexico, to San Francisco. But the trail is not, although that's the significant part of the trail, it's not just about the journey of these people. It's also about the people and the places along this route. Next slide. So we've entered this project with AIANTA, and we are well into the second year of this 3-year partnership with AIANTA. And the intent is to really chronicle the stories of the tribes located on or near the Anza Trail, where the focus is primarily the people and the places along this route. And there are 3 parts to it. One is webinars like this one for tribes, and a second one is at the end of this to print and also an online guidebook that will reflect the past and the present day tribal attractions along this trail. And then the third item is a wonderful detailed map that will translate key locations along the trail in the original native languages. Next slide. So we have 2 great, wonderful people working on this project, and I just want to share with you. And that is Steve Lares, who's at the bottom of the slide, who's a travel writer, and he's been reaching out and will reach out to tribes individually to schedule in-person visits. Of course, when it becomes safely possible. That's kind of been, COVID has delayed this, and but as soon as that's possible, he'll be meeting in person along the route, meeting with tribal historians, with culture, center, and tourism representatives, and other stakeholders that are interested in promoting their cultural tourism offerings. Another part of this is the map, and that is Dr. Margaret Pierce, a well-renowned cartographer and a writer based in Maine, will be working on a map. And on our website, I couldn't say this, I had to reiterate what says on our website, that she's devoted to narrative map design for building dialogue about Indigenous geographies and climate action. And there's a project that she worked on called Coming Home to Indigenous Place Names in Canada. And it's a map that re-envisions Canada through language and geography of its Indigenous people. If you have a chance to Google it and look it up, it's a beautiful map. And we're so pleased to have her work on this project with us. I can't wait to see it. Next slide. So the Anza Trail, the story of the expedition and the diaries of the expedition tell us of the contact between tribal nations and the Anza expedition in 1776, including a significant one in Yuma, Arizona, where Salvador Palma, a Quetzal leader, organized the assistance to members of the expedition, helping them across the Colorado River. And there are other stories of contacts between the expedition on this trail through the diaries. But with this project, we intend to really highlight the stories of the places. And Yuma is a really good example of an area with a long history prior to that one event, and then many more stories after that, that contains an abundance of stories of the places, of the people. And it's those stories that we want to highlight and focus on in this project. Next slide. So it's just another image and an example of the opportunity to share the stories of the places and the people along the route, the stories of the land, and then also really highlighting the tourism opportunities for visitors to follow along the trail with the focus on the tribal tourism and the deep stories that these places hold. Next slide. As well as the stories of the people and their resilience. Those are really important as well. So whether they be Southern Arizona, Southern California, Central California, and all the way up to Northern California and San Francisco. It's all of these stories and the richness of the stories and the people and the places that we really want to highlight. Next slide. And the next slide, please. So I really invite you to join in this collaborative project. If you are along the Anza Trail, and answer Steve Lers's call and perhaps meet up with him, and really we really invite you to take part in this project to really highlight those stories. But we look at the line is really the line, but we really want to highlight the stories of the people. So I invite you to join us in this project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Naomi. Also with us today, we have Johnpaul Jones. He is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and is a highly regarded honor to have him today. He is with Jones & Jones Architects, Landscape Architects and Planners. Johnpaul has a distinguished 45-year career as an architect and founding partner of Jones & Jones. Earning his Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Oregon in 1967, his design philosophy emerged from his Cherokee Choctaw ancestors, which connects him to the natural world, animal world, spirit world, and human world. Mr. Jones' designs have won widespread acclaim for their reverence for the earth, for paying deep respect to regional architectural traditions and native landscapes, and for heightening understanding of Indigenous people and cultures of America. Johnpaul has led the design of numerous cultural centers and museums with tribes spanning the North American continent, culminating in his 12-year engagement as overall lead design consultant for the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian on the Mall in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Johnpaul. You have to unmute yourself.
Is that it?
There you go.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you for the Native Tourism Association for inviting me to participate with Naomi on this project, or this webinar. When I think of tribal tourism, normally I think of it, and as an architect, and other people do too, they think that, well, maybe facilities for tourism is a key thing, to have facilities along the way, such as visitor centers or heritage centers, cultural museums, even theme parks. And what I found is that all of these major things require major investment by tribal organizations, and it's pretty costly. So rather than I've done a lot of these, and I really enjoy doing them for tribes throughout the West and the country. But I wanted to say that there are other types of tourism other than facilities, and they center around existing gifts that our ancestors have left to us and passed down to us, and they center around the tribal lands. And I think these this area of these gifts, I call them, are inviting and engaging for tourism. So they're not really facilities. They're connected with the land. I think it's a better connection. This connections to the land and the habitats all around on tribal lands that can really express our value and our ways better than sometimes facilities. So I centered this talk around, there's some many ancient and verbal gifts that our ancestors and elders have passed to us to use. And I consider them gifts. There's thousands of these kinds of gifts, and they're everywhere on tribal lands. I like to say there is no place in America without a tribal story. There is no place, no habitat in America that without a tribal story, because we know, I like to say, because we know every habitat in our tribal lands. We know every plant, we know every animal, we know the water, we know the rocks, we know the dirt, we know the sky, we know the clouds, we know the wind, and we know the spirit of our living places better than anybody else. And along with that comes verbal stories that connect us to these places. And they come from ancient experience of our people and knowledge of the place. And I think those are really important areas that can be used in tourism. And we can convey this through storytelling and songs, poems, dances, and just verbal stories, and not really have to have a facility for that, even though that's a worthwhile kind of thing to do. And I would suggest to you that ancient verbal gifts are really interesting to and engaging to tourism. And as an example, I would like to show you how do you deal with that? Well, as an example, my Choctaw mother and grandmother gifted me as a young man some information that I've used for 50 years to help solve problems in design, and they connect strongly to what is very important connection, and they're around the natural world, the animal world, the spirit world, and the human world. And if you could bring up the first slide, people say, well, what is that? What are those four worlds? So, Sherry, if you could bring up that slide of those four worlds, it would be handy. There it is. Okay. So rather than go into telling to you about the different kinds of facilities that, as an architect, I like to do, but I wanted to show you what those four worlds are made of, and they're made of the natural world, and the animal world, the spirit world, and the human world. And this exists on everywhere in native country, and it's really interesting to tourists. They want to learn more about that because they lack sometimes the understanding of our habitats and our lands, native lands. So go to the next, I'll go tell you a little bit about each one of them. Go to the next one. The natural world is, full of seasons and cycles, cardinal directions. They're really oftentimes doors to the universe, the equinox and the solstice. And so in a particular place, it's not just about the plants, it's about a lot of other things that our culture has learned and from experience over thousands of years. And so the natural world is full of a lot of stuff there, and worth sharing with stories and songs and poems. And so I just want to give you a little hint of some of this. Let's go to the next one, which is the animal world. You know, up where I live in the Northwest, the animal world is really transposed into the regalia and in storytelling and longhouses, and it's pretty well connected. But every tribe area has these connections to the animal world, and there's a lot of great stories that can be told in there about healing, about sharing the land, and you know, et cetera, that goes on, and about wild places and how important they are. So let's go to the next one on that, which is the spirit world. And this one, people often say, "What do you mean church?" You know, and I said, no, that's not what it's about. It's about the spirit of a living place. But it's connected to creativity and renewal. It's deals with fire and smoke and healing and cleansing and ceremonies and birth and death and wellness. It has a lot of different things, and I think that's something that is really key to part of this storytelling and sharing. Next one, which deals with the human world. And I always say this is probably the most important one, and it deals with language. You know, storytelling and teaching, but the main thing is it deals with transfer of knowledge. You know, how do you do that? And when I do a design for a museum, a native museum, I ask those questions about, okay, how would you like to, what can we provide you to help in your transferring of knowledge and sharing? Well, it's the same. You don't need a building to do that in. You can do that from storytelling and use your sites and your place, your habitat to get across those things. And I think that's all four of those worlds offer a lot of opportunity for sharing, and the tourists really want to know those kind of things. They really are very interested in that. And I want to emphasize that in the four worlds on Choctaw that I'm presenting here, there's some things I can't share because they're Choctaw private. And I think that's the same thing with every tribal lands and people. There are some things you don't want to share, you shouldn't share because they're private, but there's a lot that you can share to help people get a better understanding. And they're really engaged, and they're really engaged in that, and they want to know about those kind of things. And it's something that we can use effectively for tourism. So let's go to the next one slide. So I based everything I possibly can on that, but we do a lot of planning for tribal areas, such as this trail, the Anza Trail. We've not done that one, but we've done other ones that deal with, like the Chief Joseph Trail for the national park. And how do you, in these small communities, how do you provide for tourism? And so that's the first part that deals with those four worlds. The second one is that this is the Santa Ynez Cultural Center and Museum, just basically east of Santa Barbara. And what's interesting about this, they will be able to tell their story in more detail in a lot of different parts of this museum complex. And it's under construction right now. But what was really interesting that the tribal advisors and the director took us to various places in their area and said, this is really important. Then he told us stories about these things. So and we were designing a building. So it was wonderful for me to take that information that was shared with us as gifts and try to incorporate it into not just the building design, but the site. They have a 6.5 acre or 6.9 acres, and half of the site deals with a place to make presentations, to do dances, and then there's a small village where they can tell stories, a place where they can keep their special, unique canoes, and all of that's tied with a program of tourism and education. Besides, there's an area inside the building where they actually tell their detailed story. So it's really interesting. This is along the trail area, and it incorporates a lot. But what they started with us, like we were tourists, they shared their places and their stories, and that helped us get better at providing them with something. And I felt like I was a tourist, but I learned a heck of a lot. There's another one I won't show you an image of right now, but I'm going to show 4 or 5 of these at the conference presentation. But there's another one under construction for the Agua Caliente in Palm Springs. And we did the design layout for all that. And they, again, their advisory board, the Native Advisory Board, and the director and everybody first introduced us to their place. And I'll tell a little quick story. When we first saw their site, they said, well, I said, well, this is really beautiful, and it's all that. And I was looking, we were up high and we were out looking over the valley. And one of the elders said, no, you're looking the wrong way. You need to turn around and look into the canyons. That represents us. And it was like that kind of thing. And then they told some stories to us about the bird songs and bird things. And anyway, through all of that, it leads up to what we use in our design work. And they're incorporating all of that into their landscape and their grounds. But they already have that. The Agua Caliente have already set up to protect 2 of their canyon areas. They have the areas set up like a national park, and they manage it, monitor and charge for people to go into it. But it's I like to just say that those are really good things, but they're expensive to build, but it doesn't take a lot of money to pull together a group of Native people and their stories and take the tourists around with the land. And I think there's a great value in doing that. And those 4 worlds have a lot to offer. Our 4 worlds have a lot to offer the tourists. So that's the end of the presentation. But I thought that was a good introduction for you about those 4 worlds that lead to design of facilities and that sort of thing. So, thank you.
Thank you, Johnpaul.
Yeah.
I just want to remind everybody that if you have questions, please type them into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. I saw one question there, and I think we answered that. But I wanted to see if either Naomi or Johnpaul, you wanted to add anything else to your talk today before, while we were waiting for questions.
Well, I don't want you to learn anything with that image on the screen right now. I'm, as an architect, a Native architect, I'm very fascinated with our architectural heritage in this country, native architectural heritage. And when I went to school at University of Oregon, like all architectural students in every university that has an architectural school, you have to take 2 years of the history of architecture, of the world architecture. And when they came to, in the course, to talking about American architecture, they started with the colonial buildings and they went straight to other things, and then to Chicago and the big buildings, and then Frank Lloyd Wright and all that. And I didn't realize until afterwards, when I was graduated, that I missed a whole bunch of stuff that deals with the native architecture of this country. And so that's been my big goal for the last 50 years, is to try to inform people about that, and then to use it in the design of specific facilities. So these two rounded structures are part of the Chumash tradition. And everybody up to this point had thought, well, they only built structures that were like about 10 or 12 feet in diameter and maybe 10 feet high. But after doing some research, and I think we found that actually they built structures that were 50 or 60 feet in diameter and 50 or 60 feet in height. So that's architecture. They were doing fantastic architecture. So the Stanton Ynez director and team said, let's start bringing people, when they come to our museum, into that kind of space, because it's a spiritual space. It changes your whole outlook on everything. And so that's why you see right there at that prominent structure, that's where people start, and they get the initial message, and then they go into the rest of the facility. So you don't necessarily have to do a big museum. If you have limited resources, you could build something that represents your architectural heritage, that can just be a shelter to start with, and then be able to tell your story and be able to tell the tourists more about your habitat and the richness of your heritage, knowledge, and those gifts. So,
thank you. Well, we do have a few questions. We'll start with this first one. It says, this has been so wonderful, thank you. I'm curious whether Anza's impact on Indigenous communities in terms of colonialism and the missions will be addressed through this partnership, or is the point really to decenter Anza and the Spanish?
That one's for me, I guess. So the point, I don't understand the term decenter, but I guess the focus is around the tribal communities and the richness, and I think much like, I guess to play it in pretty common terms is to flip the script. Like, much of the trail is about the trail story and the colonists, and it is a colonizing story. We own that. It is a colonizing story, and there was devastating impact to the tribal people as well as the landscapes. But I think what isn't highlighted with this project is to highlight the richness of the people and the resilience and the power that's in these lands long before this one event that occurred.
Great, thanks, Naomi. For Johnpaul, how would you recommend approaching the Four Worlds philosophy to a historic preservation application?
Say that one more time.
How would you recommend approaching the Four Worlds philosophy to a historic preservation application?
Well, those four worlds connect directly to historic knowledge that have, from experience, that have learned over thousands of years. So that's historic. It's not all the time just a physical thing. It's the the knowledge is a historic thing too. So that's how I would say that part is probably most important to share and to connect with people. But I think if you're doing an application, it doesn't have to be just physical facilities or objects. It can really be the historic gift that I want to prefer saying that were passed down from generation to generation. And one of the story, when I was working on the Smithsonian's National Museum, we had an advisory board that was put together from Native people throughout the whole country. And there was one lady there, she was from Montana. Her name was Elma Snell. And at the first meeting, they were talking about the programs and the detail of facilities and all that. And she said to me, she said, "Why am I here? I'm not an architect." And I said, "Elma, we need you to tell us the stories about the plants of Montana, because it was passed down from generation from women to women. And it was those stories inspire us in terms of the designs and that sort of thing." So I think that's the knowledge, that's the historic knowledge that's passed down, and that should be used in the application, because that's probably the most important part. So.
Okay, good answer. So we have another question, and I think this could probably be answered by the both of you. So it says, how do you work with tribal communities to get a common vision for a place? So we know there's always, we all have differing ideas, and you mentioned it, Johnpaul, in your presentation of, things that we want to share, things that we shouldn't share or can't share, those types of things. So how do you work with communities to get a common vision for a place?
You want to start, Naomi?
Naomi, you're on mute.
On mute.
There you go.
Because we're a trail, really work with the local communities. They're the ones that are living in that space and really define the space. So we like align along this space. So it's really driven by the people in the community and their interests. And where we come in is where there's an area of mutual interest, and that's the area where we work.
Yeah. Well, I'll add to that. Sherry, can you go back to the very first slide that I was showing? Is there an opportunity to do that?
I'll sure try.
Oh, there's the last one.
Oh.
Be allowed to go back. Yeah, good. Go back to the first one. Oh, yeah, there. Now leave it at that.
Oh.
Go up. See up at the top of this, it says Cultural Framework for Diversity. Now, that's really important, because in every Native community, there's a lot of diversity. And when I work with universities to create places for Native students, I think this is very important, because it's a diverse student body from all over, Native student body that are on the campuses. And so how do you speak to them to help them participate with you in the design? Well, the same thing is in any individual tribal group. What I found is that there's radicals, Native radicals, there's the elders, there's the tribal councils, there's the cultural people, there's other groups. There's sometimes 5 or 6 groups, and they all have a focus on what they want to do. So I call it, you need something that will help them have a common connection together. And I found these 4 worlds do that. Everybody really feels comfortable talking about those 4 worlds and finding that they can share, they actually share those kinds of things to create something, a place or a building or whatever. And I've used it over and over again. and it works. And that's what my grandmother and mother used to say, if you use these, you'll solve problems. And so I found them, they were absolutely right, you know, and I use them for all kinds of things. So I would suggest that if you deal with diversity in one tribe, like I just said, there's quite a big diversity of people that are more traditional and less traditional. These things pull them all together to work together as a team. So, yeah.
Okay, I think I probably answered the next question that we had as well. It's very similar. Can you describe more about this process and how differences of opinion and ideas among group members are discussed and resolved? How are multiple perspective stories integrated and respected? So I think that's very similar to the answer you just gave. We do have another question. Thank you. Great to see this project launching. Has coronavirus and its impact on travel, tourism, and Native communities impacted the timeline and process of the project? So I think that one may be directed more towards you, Naomi.
It has, in fact, Steve Larise was, well, there's two things. We wanted to do listening sessions, and we were ready to get started in March, and then everything closed down. We even had a listening session with Sherry and myself at the University of Arizona, you know, really to make the personal contact, and but we were unable to do that. And then as well as Steve Larise, who had also wanted to get out to connect with people and travel along the route and meet with individuals, and that too has been delayed. So it has had an impact, but it's also had some, it's changed our perspectives too, in that people are traveling in their local area and learning more about their local area. And so it's really highlighted the importance of really understanding the places and really an opportunity to connect people with the areas within a drive, a day away, and really looking at that. I do want to let you know, and I'll put it in the chat, to reach out to Steve Larise if you are interested in speaking with him and assisting with the book. He can be reached at stevelarise@gmail.com, and I'll put that in the chat.
Thank you. Okay, let me see. Oh, we have another question here. This is for Johnpaul. Do you have any examples of how tribes have worked with architects to incorporate traditional practices into the buildings and landscapes of a cultural center, where the traditional practices the tribe has reserved for internal practices only, but the traditions and practices are widely published by non-native authors, and tourists are interested in these kind of sacred information? Can this be expressed in the landscape?
Well, my answer to that is that there's some things we should not share. They're private, and just like any family, there's private things that are not for sharing. But there is a lot that you can see in these four worlds that is shareable. And what I found is that it works. You know, each tribe has to do it in their own way, and with their own knowledge and their own way of presenting. In some projects, I'm going to try to show some of those at the conference when I speak at the conference in September, and I'll show you 4 or 5 of those. But along this Anza Trail is the Santa Ynez Chumash project that's underway, and it'll be operable within a year or so. And the Agua Caliente project is under construction and will be operable within a year also. So there's other ones that are smaller, and they center around different kinds of things that are more that I've worked on that are more connected to, like in Northern California, with tribes like the Yurok or the Tolowa Didi group along the coast. And there's a lot of them up here in the Northwest. But for years, I've avoided doing native housing because I didn't feel like that was the right place for me to be. And there was other native architects that could do it better than I did. So I've concentrated on educational and cultural facilities. And I thought those helped me as a young Native man when I was growing up. And I thought those things were the facilities that I wanted to focus on. And but the four worlds are in every one of them, including the one in Washington, D.C. Because most of the non-native architects says, well, what are you going to build here? Is it going to be a teepee or a hogan, or is it going to be a longhouse, or they think of those straight copies and they don't know how to really bring them forward. And what they really are not knowing about is about the four worlds and how you can use those physical things that deal with the four worlds in the design. And so the only thing I can offer you right now is to say, well, tune in to the conference in September, and I'll try to present a few more projects that tie directly to what I think help answer your question.
Well, John, I want to thank you for plugging the conference. We appreciate it. We are looking forward to your presentation, Naomi. I know that you're going to be presenting as well. So it's, again, coming up September 14th through the 18th, and registration is open at this time. I don't see any other questions, but for me, I wanted to ask Johnpaul, since you worked on the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., what was that process like, working to kind of convey the story of all the tribes across the nation?
It was not easy, took 12 years. And there was a lot of hits or miss in the beginning, but it really, after a couple of years, really narrowed down and got focused and moved forward. But we had to deal with Congress. We had to deal with specific people in the Congress. We had to deal with the tribes throughout the country. How do you get them to, be input on this? Such as in the upper Midwest and like in Milwaukee, most of the tribal people that came to one of the regional get-togethers and listening sessions, they were very much pushing that the Smithsonian better talk about all the massacres and the horrible things that happened throughout the whole Indian world. So sometimes there's just pure focuses about during the course of that 12 years about those kinds of things. And then there was another session up in the Northwest that brought in people from Alaska and along the upper coast. And one of the elders in the community there said, when I go there, when this is all built, I better see some of my culture there, So those were all very difficult things. How do you do that? Was it a physical thing? Did you see some object, or you see some architecture, or do you see some landscape that actually speaks directly to that area? But what I did is I centered everybody around these four worlds and said, okay, this is what we're designing with. We're not just doing a longhouse or a teepee or a hogan. All those structures incorporate these things, these four worlds into it. And that's what we're going to do. Now, the Smithsonian turned around and said, well, everything has to be out of stone. Okay, because that's what it is in Washington, D.C. on the mall. It's all out of stone. And then another group in the Capital Planning Commission said, well, you have to have all this one type of tree, and they have to go along the edge of the property and be lined up, two rows on this side, one row on that side, another row. And so for us to try to bring in the natural world was, okay, you know, how are you going to do that? And I just said, well, we're going to put it there, and we'll put those trees there too. And we'll just all make it work together. And so, and then there was another group called the they were the Fine Arts Commission for the mall in Washington, D.C. And they're like the Supreme Court, they're appointed for life, and they're all non-diverse people on it. And they had some very strong opinions about, oh, you got to have a dome, and you got to have some other certain things. You got to have all these other physical non-native things. And I just said, well, that's fine. Thank you very much. We'll use those. We'll incorporate them in. And that's what we did. And I don't like to say it was just me. There was Ramona Sakiestewa from Santa Fe. She was part of the team. Donna House, who's a Navajo botanist, was part of the team. Douglas Cardinal was part of the team originally. And then Lou Weller, I brought him on after Douglas pulled back out of it. And we continued on. And, you know, I found getting people involved in talking about these four worlds helps in finding design solutions to both physical, landscape, interiors, architecture. So I didn't do any of the exhibit work, but I got involved, our team got involved in helping when they ran into some physical problems about things. So I hope that gave you some kind of an answer.
It did.
Okay.
I think it's amazing, the process that you have to go through.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
What's happening?
Can you guys hear feedback on my sound?
Yes.
Yeah.
But we heard the echo too. That's good.
Okay. Well, those are the last questions that we had today. If you have any other questions that you like answered, you can email us or email Sherry Bowman. Her email is sbowman, BOWMAN, at AIANTA, AIANTA.org. And we'd be happy to get an answer to you on your questions from today's webinar. We'll be posting the webinar on the AIANTA website and send you a link to your email address. Please follow us on AIANTA.org/webinar for future webinars hosted by AIANTA. And I wanted to thank all of you for coming today and participating. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate the time. And I just want to wish you a great rest of your day. And don't forget to register for the American Indian Tourism Conference coming up September 14th through the 18th. And we'll see you next time. And thank you to our wonderful presenters, Johnpaul Jones and Naomi Torres.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.